Well, blessings, everybody. This is Dale. Thank you so much for joining with me today on the Word Podcast. I've been sitting here messing with my microphone saying, man, this thing doesn't sound right. Something's wrong with it. I about decided it wasn't the microphone, it's me. I think I got a plant here in my office that's blooming. It's that time of year, you know. I looked over here and it's growing really, really quick, but it's stuffing my nose up. So if you're hearing some strangeness, that's what's going on. We are in Romans chapter 1. And I have to go back to verse 18 again. I know we've gone through this several times, but folks, we need to have this truth so internalized within us. We need to know this without having to think, I got to look this up. No, we need to know this as the truth of the Most High God. So let me start here, then we'll press on a couple more verses, okay? And verse 18 said this, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain, or is evident, or is manifest, because God has shown it to them. For his, God, invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and his Godhead, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Therefore, God gave them up to the lust of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen." So it took me about 86 seconds to read that. Okay, a minute and a half to read that. Sometimes we think, well, I don't have time to read this. I don't have time to really do this. Folks, we have time to do what we want to do. That's the harsh reality. We do what we want to do. So remember the context we just read. Verse 26 now. For this reason, in other words, King James says, for this cause, the idea being because of this, because of what I just said, God gave them up, or God gave them over. Here we say it again. God gave them up to dishonorable passions, or as the New American Standard says, degrading passions. King Jimmy says, vile affections. So what does that mean? What is vile? What is dishonorable? What is degrading? You know, in my mind, when I hear dishonorable, I'm thinking, okay, without honor, you know, and that has a certain connotation emotively, feeling-wise. Degrading is something else. It's similar to it, but it's like somebody is degrading you. It's occurring to you. Vile, boy, that's something else. It does mean exactly that. The word means degrading, dishonorable, shameful, okay, indignity, disgrace, that kind of idea. Okay, dishonorable is a good one. It really is. Shameful passions. So it's talking about vile affections, and that word affections is pathos. Yeah, pathos. If you're apathetic, you have no passion towards something. And it's about a feeling, particularly surrounding suffering. You know, a lot of times we associate it with a joyous thing, and it is. It can be sad or joyous, but we forget about the sad, the afflictive part of it, the suffering part of it. And so what they do, God gives them over to these vile affections, to degrading passions, to dishonorable passions. And remember, we're talking about these that are ungodly, these that have turned away from the truth that they know because God has placed the truth in them. And so if you just stopped right there, and if that's all we had, then you could apply this to any number of things, which you can. Okay, you can. But God is getting very precise right here. He has something in mind, and he's not going to leave us hanging as to what he's talking about. So I continue to read from the ESV. For this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. For, F-O-R, in other words, because or in light of, for their women exchange natural relations for those that are contrary to nature. Well, what in the world? Well, that's the end of that verse, but it's in the middle of the sentence. So let me read the next verse and finish the sentence. And the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. So, do you hear what's going on here? Do you hear what's being said? Their women exchange natural relations for those that are contrary to nature. And you may be thinking, well, I'm not quite sure what that's talking about. And that's understandable if that's all you had. But when you add this, and the men likewise, in the same way, likewise, gave up natural relations with women. So the natural relations is defined as men with women. So we understand what's being said about the women initially. So it's men with women. They are consumed with passion for one another. Men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. So what's being addressed here is homosexuality. There's no doubt about it. You would not believe the voluminous amount of books, articles, etc., that deal with this passage, particularly in trying to explain away the homosexual element of it. But you can't explain it away. You can't sit here and say, oh, well, you've got to understand that back there in those times, they thought this. I mean, I really do. I get so tired of reading that kind of stuff. And I go, oh, really? Show me where it says that. And they may be able to pull up some document or some writing, and you go, but that's not what's being said there. You think that's what's being said. That's what you want it to say. And then you take it and you guise it under time. 3,000 years ago it was said, something like that. And then you think it's a proper thing whereby you can interpret something here in the book of Romans. No. It's very, very simple. He's talking about the fact that because of the way they're thinking, because they profess themselves to be wise, because they turn away from the truth of God, God gives them over to these degrading passions, and it gets worse and worse. It gets to the point where the women exchange natural relationship with men for women. It's contrary to nature. What is meant by contrary to nature? This is not the way nature is designed. Now, of course, man comes along and says, well, we've got some animals right here that we can point to. We got some bacteria. We've got some things we can point to that looks like that they're unisex, that looks like this and that. And they use that kind of mindset to explain the balance of creation. And you can't do that. What it's talking about, contrary to nature, is that if it's woman with woman and man with man, nature will not exist. They will not be able to reproduce. It's just that simple. But look what God says. He says that men are committing shameless acts with men. These are shameless acts, men with men, women with women. If you don't know what those shameless acts are, you can go back in the Word, in the Old Testament, and he describes it and says, this is abhorrent. This is horrible. You do not behave this way. But then he says, I'll have to close with this and we'll continue later. They receive in themselves the due penalty for their error. They receive within themselves, spiritually, emotionally, individually, the due penalty. They receive in themselves, physically, the due penalty for their error. I'll tell you what, we'll continue on in this next episode. I'll see y'all then.